Hi, my name is Jenny Barefield, and this is my story. I grew up in a broken home, which meant I got taken from my mom at a very young age, and I went to live with my dad and stepmom. They would always just yell and argue and bully us, basically, and belittle us. I went to bed crying some nights, and I felt alone. I felt like I had no purpose. And I felt that I wasn't even wanted. And at one point, me and my sister did run away. Of course, we came back, but it was the thought of, I need to get out of this house. I don't want to be here anymore. A couple of years later, my neighbor brought me to Stanley Chapel, and I started coming just to get out of the house and get away from my parents, and it didn't really mean that much to me. A couple months later, I started going to the youth group, and we were going to this concert. It was a David Crowder concert in Pinehurst, and the guy that was the speaker there was talking about he felt lonely and worthless and like he had no purpose, and I just broke down crying because that's what I felt like. I didn't feel like I had a purpose. And I ran over to Pastor Mike to pray with me, and I told him I couldn't do this on my own, that I needed help. That night, while praying with Pastor Mike, I gave my life to Jesus. It wasn't an overnight transformation. I didn't even know where to begin as far as being a Christian. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to start. So I started, going to church and actually listening and participating in youth group and getting involved in church. And I even cracked open the King James Version. I didn't understand a word, but that didn't stop me. I downloaded the YouVersion app so that way I could actually understand God's Word, and it really helped me as far as finding peace. Another thing I started doing at Stanley Chapel is going to 3D groups. And one night at 3D group, we were going through a series called The Road to Forgiveness. And let me read you a line that really hit me. Jesus forgives us because he loves us. Forgive yourself and forgive others. Do it for yourself and do it for peace. When that was read, I just was speechless, but I felt really ashamed because I had held on to all this anger and all this hurt and all these grudges that I held over people's heads, over my dad's head for the longest time. And holding those grudges can affect a relationship, and it hit me as to why I didn't have a relationship with my dad, because it was my own fault. And as soon as we finished reading that, I texted my dad and told him I loved him. That was probably the first time I told him I loved him in 7 years, and I was the reason we didn't have a relationship because I held on to unforgiveness. So after everyone left that night at 3D group, I stayed back and I prayed with Janet. I prayed that God would forgive me for not forgiving my dad. And I prayed that I would have the courage and the strength to talk to my dad. She gave me homework to every day hug my dad and tell him I love him. Now this may sound easy, but me and my dad's relationship was to the point where I couldn't even be in the same room with him without wanting to, argue. Once I started telling my dad I loved him and started hugging him, at first, yes, it was very awkward and very uncomfortable because I was hugging a man that I barely knew. But it started to actually feel like he loved me back. And it was very unusual because I hadn't felt that ever from him. And I see when Pastor Dale takes his daughter out on a daughter date, or Pastor Shane takes his daughter to like paint or something, I would always get jealous of those daddy-daughter dates that I always saw on Facebook because I never had that. So when I started hugging my dad and telling him I loved him, it was it gave me my dad back. And now I say I love you every day, and it's not for my homework, it's because I actually do love him, and I give him hugs, and forgiving someone gave my dad back. To end it off, I want to say thank you for Jesus for forgiving me, and I want to thank Stanley Chapel and Life Springs for giving me a place to grow. My name's Jenny, and that's my story.